His name was Julian Cross. 35, charismatic, clever, and ruthless with a microphone in his hand. He didn't just tell jokes. He tore down beliefs. For him, the most sacred thing to destroy was faith. The more sacred was to someone else, the more satisfying it was for Julian to shatter it under the bright lights of his stage. He wasn't always this way. Once, many years ago, he believed. A quiet church in a small Ohio town, soft hymns sung by trembling voices, hands held in pews that creaked when old men wept. That was his childhood, warm, silent, and filled with invisible things. Angels, prayers, crosses on the wall. But that was before his father left. Before the late-night arguments between his mother and the man who claimed to be a pastor, but couldn't seem to pray without a bottle in his hand. Before the prayers turned into empty whispers and the miracles into unpaid bills. Faith didn't just fade, it betrayed him. So Julian walked away. He learned to use laughter as a shield, sarcasm as a sword. And on stage, with thousands watching or millions scrolling, he attacked. His sets became infamous online, viral clips where he impersonated Jesus fumbling in heaven, where he reenacted the crucifixion as a comedy sketch, where he shouted into the mic, "If he's real, why hasn't he struck me down yet?" The audience always laughed. They laughed loud. But when the lights dimmed, when the dressing room was silent and the makeup wiped off, Julian sat in front of the mirror and said nothing. He didn't believe in silence. That's why his world was always filled with noise. People, parties, podcasts, shows. The louder it was, the easier it was to forget that silence had a sound, the echo of things he once prayed. On a Thursday night in New York, Julian headlined a sold-out theater. It was supposed to be his big comeback tour. The posters read, "Faithless. Julian Cross returns to the stage." His opening line that night, "Some people go to church to find God. I just needed Wi-Fi and a decent parking spot." Laughter roared. He fed off like fire. He kept going. Jabs at religion, Bible stories twisted into punchlines. Even a full 5-minute impression of someone speaking in tongues, performed with such mockery that people in the front rows had tears in their eyes from laughter. But deep behind the curtain, just off stage, a stagehand, an older man, didn't laugh. He stood with his arms crossed, watching Julian like a man watching a fire spread in a field that was once his home. He said nothing, just stared. Julian noticed. After the show, Julian retreated to his dressing room. Applause still echoed in the distance. He poured himself a drink, leaned back in the chair, and stared into his own eyes in the mirror. But something was wrong. He couldn't hear the applause anymore. Not really. It was muffled, like it was behind glass. His ears were fine. It wasn't the sound, it was the meaning. It had vanished. He laughed to himself. Guess they'll cancel me next time. Maybe I should take on angels and demons next. His voice was dry, hollow. No one laughed. There was a knock at the door. Julian didn't respond. Another knock. He got up, expecting an assistant or maybe the manager. But the hallway was empty, only silence. And something else. A scent, something warm, familiar, like the old wooden pews from his childhood church, like wax from candles long melted. He blinked hard. His fingers trembled just slightly. He shook his head and slammed the door shut. He didn't believe in signs. Not anymore. And yet, that night, when everyone had left the building and the janitor locked the back doors, Julian remained behind, hidden, in the dark, backstage. He told the staff he'd gone. But he hadn't. He walked to the center of the empty stage where hours before he had shouted jokes about the crucifixion and stood there, alone. The seats were empty now, but something felt watched. He whispered, "What now? What happens when the show ends and I'm still the joke?" No one answered. And yet, deep within the stillness of that empty theater, something shifted. Something unseen began to listen. Julian stood frozen at center stage, staring into the shadows of the empty seats. No lights, no laughter, no noise. Only the soft hum of the building's old ventilation system and the subtle creak of aging beams above. He had performed in theaters his whole adult life, but he had never felt a room breathe before. And this room was breathing. He whispered again, "What now?" But his voice disappeared before reaching the back row. For a long time, he stood in silence. His eyes adjusted to the darkness. The theater, once a kingdom of spotlight and sound, now felt like a tomb, or maybe a chapel, a place where something sacred had once lived, or still did. He walked to the edge of the stage and sat down, legs hanging over the side. The smell of old wood and dust clung to the air. He rubbed his hands together and tried to convince himself he wasn't unraveling. "It's just exhaustion," he muttered. "Long tour. Not enough sleep. That's all." But somewhere inside, he knew that wasn't true. The strange thing about mocking something for so long is that it never really dies in you. You just build walls around it. Thick, sarcastic walls. Julian had built those walls higher every year. But now, tonight, something was knocking on the other side. A memory floated up from the dark. A church play when he was 9. He had played the role of the innkeeper in the nativity scene. He forgot his one line, froze under the lights, and started crying in front of the whole congregation. But no one laughed. Instead, his Sunday school teacher had come up on stage, knelt beside him, and whispered, "It's okay. You're not alone up here." That line returned to him now, nearly 30 years later. "You're not alone up here." Julian laughed bitterly. "Yeah, then where are you now?" He didn't expect an answer, but something shifted. The air around him changed. Not colder, not warmer, just denser, like someone had entered the room and was standing still in the dark. He stood up sharply, his breath catching. "Hello," he called out. "Is someone here?" No answer. He stepped off the stage and walked slowly down the center aisle. His footsteps echoed in the silence. One by one, the empty seats seemed to lean inward, watching him. He reached the middle of the room, stopped, looked up at the balcony. Nothing. He turned to leave, brushing it all off as his mind playing tricks. Then he saw it. A single chair, front row center, now had something resting on it. It hadn't been there before. A small, worn-out Bible, black leather, frayed edges, gold lettering almost faded off the spine. He picked it up. His heart stopped. He recognized it. It was his. The same Bible he'd been given at age 11. The same one he had thrown into a moving river at 15 after shouting, "I'm done with you." He turned it over in his hands, stunned. Inside the cover, his name was still written in sloppy, childlike print, Julian Cross. Beneath it, the words, "You are loved, no matter what." Tears stung his eyes. He didn't cry. He never cried. He sat down in the seat where the Bible had been and stared at the stage, the place where he had mocked God, where he had become famous for tearing down heaven. And now, heaven was answering, but not with thunder, not with fire. With a whisper, he opened the Bible to a random page. His fingers stopped at the story of the prodigal son. Of course it would be that story. Julian swallowed hard, leaned back in the chair, and stared at the ceiling. "What do you want from me?" he asked the shadows above. The silence lingered, but it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt patient. Julian sat with the Bible in his lap, his fingers trembling around its worn edges. The world felt quieter now, like the theater had inhaled deeply and was waiting. For what? He wasn't sure. He hadn't touched a Bible in over 2 decades, yet it sat there like it had never left him, as if it had waited in silence all these years, following him from city to city, stage to stage, mockery to mockery, and now had chosen this moment to return. He flipped through more pages, not reading, just touching. Some pages were wrinkled, warped from water. Others were pristine, but they all held the same stillness. And somehow, the air felt thicker around him, like time had folded in on itself, and he was no longer 35 and bitter, but 11 again, confused, angry, still praying under his breath at night, even though no one heard. That was always the wound, not just a loss of faith, but the silence that followed. He remembered the last time he tried to pray. It was a hospital waiting room. His mother had collapsed. He was 18. Doctors came and went. Machines beeped. And Julian, slouched in the corner chair, whispered into his hands, "Please, don't take her yet, please." She died that night. No voice answered. No hand comforted. No angel appeared. Just cold fluorescent lights and a nurse who didn't make eye contact. He had stood in the hallway, fists clenched, and screamed at the ceiling, "You're not real. You never were." And from that moment, every stage became his pulpit of revenge. Every laugh of victory against a God who didn't speak when he begged him to. But now something was different. Julian stood and walked slowly back to the stage, the Bible still in his hand. He looked out the rows of empty seats, the same ones he had once commanded with jokes, ego, and flawless timing. And in that moment, he whispered something that surprised even him. "I don't know who I am without this anger." His voice cracked. He hadn't meant to say it out loud, but the theater had a way of drawing out what was buried. He sat cross-legged on the stage and stared at the floor. Then, his mind drifted to something he'd never shared with anyone, not even in interviews, not with his closest friends. When he was a child, he used to sing alone at night, softly, quietly, hymns his mother had taught him. And there was one he always came back to, a simple one. "Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so." He hadn't thought of it in years. But now, the melody echoed faintly in the back of his mind. So faint, it was like someone else was singing it nearby. Julian looked up. No one was there, but the air had changed again. It was warmer. Not heat, not like temperature, but warmth of something alive, present. And then the stage lights flickered. Just once. He stood quickly, startled, looked around. Nothing moved. He exhaled and muttered, "Get a grip, Julian." But something in him didn't want to grip anymore. He didn't want to perform. Not now. Not like this. He sat back down and held the Bible close to his chest. Not reading, just holding, like a child clinging to a photo of someone they barely remembered but deeply missed. "Why are you doing this now?" he asked the silence. "Why here? Why me?" No thunder, no answer, just the stillness. He remained there for hours, long after midnight, until his eyes grew heavy, until sleep crept into the corners of his vision. And just before he drifted off, in that space between waking and dreaming, he thought he saw something, a figure, standing at the back of the theater, tall, gentle, glowing faintly, watching, waiting. Then everything went dark. Julian woke up with a jolt, heart racing, as if something had touched him in the silence. The theater was still dark, the seats empty, the echoes gone. But the feeling hadn't left, that presence, the strange peace and the tension. It lingered, like the last note of a song, still vibrating in the walls. He sat up slowly, his back sore from sleeping on the stage, and looked toward the spot where he'd seen the figure. Nothing there now. No glow, no voice, but his spirit felt bruised, tender in a way he hadn't known for years. He rubbed his face and exhaled. "Am I losing my mind?" But even as he said it, he knew that wasn't it. He was waking up, not losing himself, but finding someone he thought had vanished in the wreckage of his youth. He reached for the Bible again. Still there, still waiting. He opened it carefully and read for a while. Just a few verses at first, then pages at a time. Words he once mocked now pressed into him with unexpected weight. He didn't understand all of it, but he didn't need to. Something in it was speaking to him, not through logic, but through hunger. He hadn't realized how starving his soul had been. But with every word he read, a different voice echoed louder, not from the pages, but from within. "You're a hypocrite. You can't undo what you said. The world already knows who you are." Shame, like smoke, slithered back in. He remembered every cruel joke, every twisted skit. Every time he stood in front of thousands of people and reduced miracles to memes and suffering to satire. How could he ever come back from that? He closed the Bible and stared at the stage lights above. "Even if you are real, why would you come to me?" And for the first time, something answered. Not a voice, not a sound, but an overwhelming sense, like words spoken directly to his heart. "Because I never left you." His eyes welled instantly. The words didn't come from his own thoughts. They were too direct, too still, too loving. He stood again, shaky, overwhelmed. "I mocked you. I laughed at you. I made millions laugh at you. But the presence didn't flinch. Instead, something more terrifying happened. He felt loved, not scolded, not punished, just held, and it shattered him. Julian fell to his knees in the center of the stage, not for performance, but for surrender. No cameras, no crowd, no applause. Just him, a man undone by grace. He stayed there, sobbing. No words, no structure, just tears. The first prayer he'd said in 20 years wasn't really a prayer. It was a breath, a whimper, a heart cracking open. When he finally looked up again, the air felt even clearer. The weight was still there, but it no longer crushed him. It steadied him. He stood, and then he heard footsteps. Real ones. Someone was walking down the center aisle of the empty theater. Julian turned quickly, heart pounding. And there he was. The man, the same figure from a night before. But now, he was real, simple clothes, a calm face, eyes that didn't just look at Julian. They saw him. He didn't glow. He didn't float. He just stood there, one hand extended like an invitation. Julian couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. He took a step forward, then another, then collapsed again, overwhelmed by a flood of emotion. The man knelt beside him, said nothing, but Julian felt something in the silence. Forgiveness. Julian didn't know how long he remained on the floor, his body trembling, his face wet with tears. He hadn't cried like that since he was a child, and even then, it had been silent, hidden behind locked doors or buried under sarcasm. But now it flowed freely, not from pain, but from something deeper, the kind of release that only happens when you realize you've been wrong, yet still embraced. The man, Jesus, didn't speak. Not yet, but his presence alone was the answer to every question Julian had ever asked. There was no judgment in his eyes, no shame reflected back, only understanding. Infinite, immeasurable, unshakable love. Julian slowly sat up, unsure what to say. His voice was hoarse when he finally asked, "Why now?" Jesus' gaze remained soft. "Because now you're finally ready to listen." Julian looked down at his hands. The same hands that had held microphones, signed book deals, crafted blasphemies into viral jokes. Now they trembled like they didn't belong to him. "I tore you apart on stage. I turned you into a joke." Jesus nodded gently. "And yet here I am." Julian's breath hitched. "Why would you come back for me?" Jesus stepped forward and sat beside him on the stage. Just two men in an empty theater. "Because I never left." Julian couldn't hold it anymore. He broke again, sobbing into his hands, ashamed, grateful, overwhelmed. And in that flood of emotion, something deeper began to unravel inside him. Not just his guilt, but his need to be right, his obsession with control, the defense mechanisms he'd built around his wounds. All of it began to fall away. "I don't know how to believe again," Julian admitted through broken breaths. "I don't know how to go back." Jesus looked at him with kindness that could melt stone. "I'm not asking you to go back. I'm asking you to come forward." Julian raised his eyes. "But I don't deserve forgiveness." "No one does," Jesus replied, "and yet I offer to all." Silence settled again, this time not heavy but peaceful. Jesus stood slowly and walked to the edge of the stage, gazing out into the empty seats as if they were filled with people. "Every night you mocked me, I was there. Every time you made them laugh, I saw the pain behind your eyes. Every time you fell asleep wondering if I was real, I whispered. You just couldn't hear me through the noise." Julian wiped his face and rose to his feet. The air felt new. So, did he? He stepped beside Jesus and looked out at the same empty rows. But they didn't feel empty anymore. "They love me for being cruel," Julian said. "What if they hate me for changing?" "They hated me first," Jesus said without flinching. "You don't need their approval. You never did." Julian closed his eyes. "What do I do now?" Jesus placed a hand on his shoulder. "Tell the truth." And just like that, he was gone. Not in a flash, not in a blaze of glory. He simply wasn't there anymore, as if he had never been, and yet somehow always would be. Julian stood still, his heart racing, his chest filled with something he couldn't name, a mix of peace, fear, awe and clarity. He was no longer the man who had walked into that theater. Something had changed, something eternal. He looked down at the Bible in his hand once more. This time, he opened it not to prove it wrong, but to hear it speak. Julian didn't leave the theater immediately. He remained on that stage, quietly sitting, sometimes praying or just breathing. It wasn't fear that kept him there anymore. It was reverence. The weight of what had just happened refused to let him go casually. How could he step back into the world the same man he had always been when he knew he wasn't? The morning sun filtered through the theater doors. Dust floated in golden shafts of light. Julian stood slowly, grabbed his coat, the Bible, and walked out, not into applause, but into stillness, a sacred kind of quiet. Outside, the city was already moving. Cars honking, people walking fast, phones ringing. Life didn't stop just because he had. But inside Julian, the entire world had tilted. He made it home without really remembering how. The streets blurred not because of tears, but because everything felt new, like the lens through which he viewed reality had been wiped clean. But the real challenge didn't begin until he opened his phone. Notifications exploded across his screen. Clips from last night's show, the one where he had mocked God more savagely than ever before, were trending. Headlines read, "Julian Cross blasts religion in brutal monologue. Comedian destroys faith again. Fans cheer." He felt sick. How strange that the moment he had been internally crumbling had looked like triumph to everyone else. Then came the texts, messages from agents, sponsors, comedy networks. "Insane set last night. Let's get you on a talk show this week. Booked out for 3 weeks straight. Your God bid is..." His heart dropped. They were celebrating the very performance that had broken him. And now they wanted more. But he couldn't give them more of that man. That man was gone. He sat down, staring at the screen. Could he say no? Walk away? This was his career, his brand, his livelihood. And yet his fingers hovered over the keyboard. "What are you doing?" he asked himself. He remembered Jesus' words clearly. Tell the truth. With trembling hands, he opened a blank post and began to type. "Last night, something happened to me. I don't expect everyone to understand it. I barely do myself. But I need to say it anyway. I believe Jesus met me after the show. Not in metaphor. Not in concept. I mean it. I saw him. I felt him. And I can't go back to who I was before." He paused. His entire career hung in the balance of the next words. But he typed anyway. "I mocked God. I ridiculed what many hold sacred. I thought I was being clever. But the truth is, I was lost. And now I've been found. Do what you will with that. Unfollow me, cancel me, mock me back. It doesn't matter. I just want to walk in truth now. And that truth is this: Jesus is real, and he still speaks." He hit send. No dramatic music. No divine thunder. Just silence. And then chaos. Within minutes, the post began to explode. Thousands of likes. Thousands of unfollows. Thousands of angry comments. Thousands of people saying he was faking it, had lost his mind, was pulling a publicity stunt. But buried in the flood were others. Quiet comments, different in tone. I felt him too. "You're not alone. He met me in my prison cell. He saved my life too. Thank you for telling the truth." Julian's eyes filled again. Not from shame this time, but from awe. He had no idea what would come next, but he knew he wouldn't walk it alone. The backlash came harder than Julian had expected. Headlines flipped overnight. "Julian Cross has a meltdown, claims Jesus appeared to him." From comedy to Christianity, Julian Cross loses it. Is this the end of a legend or just the start of a cult? Major sponsors dropped him within 48 hours. His scheduled tour dates were canceled, one by one, until the calendar he once used to brag about sat completely empty. Late-night talk shows that used to praise him now use him as a punchline. The irony wasn't lost on him. The same stage that had made him a star now mocked his faith. But Julian didn't waver. Not because it didn't hurt. It did. Deeply. He missed the applause, the easy admiration, the respect in people's eyes. Fame was addictive. and letting go of it felt like detoxing from something he hadn't known was killing him. Still, he remained steady, because somewhere in all the noise and the betrayal and the hollowing out of everything he used to worship, he had found someone who didn't walk away. Jesus, not the version he used to mock on stage, but the living, breathing truth of who he was. Gentle, fierce, full of mercy. The kind of presence that didn't demand performance but welcomed weakness. And the more Julian let go of the old self, the clearer his new path became. He didn't run from the hate. He answered it, not with arguments but with humility. He started replying to hateful comments with words like, "I understand. I would have said the same a month ago. I get it. I laughed too. For years. All I can say is, I met him, and he changed me." That posture, not defensive but honest, started to disarm people. Slowly, quietly, a few messages started trickling into his inbox. "What do you mean you met him? I've never believed, but something in what you said hit me. I think I want what you found." And that's when Julian realized this wasn't the end. It was the beginning. He didn't need a stage to share what mattered now. He began posting short videos, not perform, but to testify. Raw. Quiet monologues from his kitchen table. No lighting, no script, no makeup. Just truth. He spoke of guilt, of being lost, of hating himself, and then of meeting a savior who knew it all and still reached out. The response was slow but real. Hundreds became thousands. Not fans, but seekers. People who were angry at God, but still hoping he might not be done with them yet. Julian wasn't trying to build a ministry. He was just telling the truth that had wrecked and rescued him in the same breath. One night, a message came in that stopped him cold. "I was going to end my life tonight, but I watched your video, and something you said made me stop. I cried for the first time in years. I prayed. I didn't know how, but I just said, 'Jesus, help me.' And I felt something. I don't know what this is yet, but thank you. You saved me." Julian stared at the screen for a long time, and then he wept, not from grief this time, but from purpose. Because now he knew every canceled show, every mocking article, every friend who ghosted him, it had all been worth it. Jesus had turned a stage of mockery into a platform of mercy. And he wasn't finished yet. Months passed. The world moved on. New controversies, new headlines, new stars. Julian's name faded from trending lists, from late-night jokes, from magazine covers. He was no longer the voice of a generation, at least not the one he used to be, but something far greater had taken root. He wasn't chasing fame now. He was walking in faith. Julian had begun meeting small groups of people, face to face. Some in coffee shops, some in old church basements, some on quiet walks through city parks. He'd listen to their pain, to their doubt, to the same mockery he once carried. And he wouldn't argue. He'd just tell them what happened to him. He never claimed to have all the answers. Only one, Jesus. Some believed, some walked away, but all of them heard something real. And for Julian, that was enough. He started volunteering at places no one expected him to show up: youth shelters, rehab centers, halfway homes. He wasn't a preacher. He never called himself that. He was just a man who'd met Jesus in the wreckage of his ego and lived to tell the story. One cold winter night, almost a year after that fateful encounter, Julian returned to the empty theater, not to perform, but to remember. He walked the aisle slowly, the silence wrapping around him like a warm coat. He stepped onto the same stage where he'd once ridiculed God and sat cross-legged, alone. He pulled out a crumpled piece of paper from his coat pocket, the same note he had scribbled the morning after his encounter. It simply read, "He met me here." Julian looked around the room, still empty, but somehow still full. He closed his eyes and whispered, "Thank you." There was no voice this time, no figure in the aisle, but he didn't need one. He knew. He stood, walked to the center of the stage, and with no camera, no lights, no crowd, he raised his hands and smiled, not for performance, but for praise. Somewhere in the far corner of the theater, unnoticed and quiet, someone else sat watching, a young man, angry, lost, skeptical. But something in Julian's presence had kept him from leaving. He didn't believe in God. Not yet, but he believed in change. And that was enough for now. Julian stepped off the stage, walked past him, and gently placed a note in the boy's hand. He met me here. And with that, he walked out into the cold night, heart full, purpose clear, faith unshaken. Jesus had turned his shame into testimony, and he was still writing the story.